Close your eyes now, and let your mind drift back through the mists of time, back to when the world was young, and humanity was just beginning to dream of something greater. Long before skyscrapers touched the clouds, before engines roared or screens glowed, there was silence. And in that silence, our ancestors looked up at the stars and wondered. They gathered together, and from their gathering, civilizations were born. The story begins in a place we now call Mesopotamia, nestled between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The ancient Greeks would later call this land the place between rivers, and it was here, in this fertile crescent, that something remarkable happened. Around 3500 BCE, the Sumerians developed one of humanity's very first writing systems. They called it cuneiform, and they created it by pressing wedge-shaped reeds into soft clay tablets. Imagine the first person who realized that marks on clay could capture thoughts, stories, and dreams, preserving them not just for tomorrow, but for thousands of years to come. These clay tablets were left to dry in the warm Mesopotamian sun, hardening into permanent records. And so, for the first time in human history, knowledge could outlive the person who created it. Voices could echo across the ages. But the Sumerians gave us something else, something we use every single day without thinking about it. They looked up at the night sky, watched the moon wax and wane, and divided their world into units of 60. 60 seconds in a minute. 60 minutes in an hour. This sexagesimal system, as scholars call it, was their gift to us, born from ancient astronomers who charted the heavens on long, quiet nights much like this one. Now let your mind drift westward, across desert sands, to the banks of another great river, the Nile. Here, where the river flooded each year with perfect regularity, bringing rich black soil to the land, another magnificent civilization arose. The ancient Egyptians called their country Kemet, which means the Black Land, named for that precious, life-giving soil. The Egyptians became masters of many things, but perhaps none more fascinating than their understanding of the human body. Around 3000 BCE, they began practicing medicine with a sophistication that would not be matched for millennia. They performed surgeries, set broken bones, and treated diseases. In the Edwin Smith Papyrus, one of the oldest medical documents ever found, Egyptian physicians described 48 different surgical cases, detailing symptoms and treatments with remarkable precision. They identified the heart as a pump, understood that pulse was connected to heart function, and even performed brain surgery. Imagine the steady hands of an Egyptian physician, working by lamplight, armed with copper tools and centuries of accumulated knowledge. The Egyptians were also deeply spiritual people, and their beliefs shaped one of the most ambitious construction projects in human history. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 2560 BCE for Pharaoh Khufu, stood as the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. Let that sink in for a moment. 3,800 years of holding that record. This magnificent monument was constructed from approximately 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons. Workers, not slaves, as was once believed, but paid laborers, moved these massive stones without wheels, without pulleys, using only ramps, ropes, and human determination. The precision is astounding. The base of the pyramid is level to within just 1 inch, and the sides are aligned almost perfectly with true north. Now, Drift with me across the Mediterranean Sea, to the island of Crete, where another ancient people thrived. The Minoans, named after their legendary king Minos, built a civilization of remarkable sophistication between 2700 and 1450 BCE. Their palace at Knossos was a marvel, a sprawling complex with indoor plumbing, complete with flushing toilets and a sewage system. While much of the ancient world still relied on the most basic of facilities, the Minoans were enjoying a level of comfort that some parts of the world wouldn't see again until the modern era. The Minoans were also a peaceful people, at least compared to many of their neighbors. Their art celebrated nature, beauty, and joy rather than war and conquest. They painted dolphins leaping through blue waters, lilies swaying in the breeze, and elegant figures dancing. Their civilization reminds us that not all ancient peoples were defined by warfare. Some chose to build, to create, to find harmony with the world around them. Let yourself relax deeper now, as we journey east, to the Indus Valley, where the Harappan civilization flourished along the Indus River around 2500 BCE. The cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were marvels of urban planning, laid out in precise grid patterns that would make modern city planners envious. The streets ran north-south and east-west, intersecting at right angles. Every home had access to a sophisticated drainage system, with covered drains running beneath the streets. This was city planning on a scale not seen anywhere else in the ancient world at that time. What's perhaps most intriguing about the Harappans is what we don't know. They left behind a written script, carved into small seals made of stone, but to this day, no one has been able to decipher it. Their language remains a mystery, their stories locked away in symbols we cannot yet read. Sometimes the past keeps its secrets, leaving us to wonder. As your breathing slows and deepens, let these ancient civilizations settle into your mind like dust motes drifting through a beam of sunlight. The Sumerians writing on clay. The Egyptians building for eternity. The Minoans dancing in their frescoed palaces. The Harappans designing their perfect cities. All of them human, just like you. All of them looking up at the same stars. All of them dreaming of tomorrow. Now let your thoughts drift further east still, across mountains and plateaus, to the Yellow River Valley of ancient China. Here, around 1600 BCE, the Shang dynasty emerged, and with it came another remarkable innovation in human communication. The Shang people developed a writing system using oracle bones. These were turtle shells and ox shoulder blades that priests would inscribe with questions for the gods. They would then heat these bones until they cracked, and interpret the patterns of the cracks as divine answers. But what's truly extraordinary is that the characters they carved onto these oracle bones evolved into modern Chinese script. If you look at Chinese writing today, you're seeing a direct descendant of symbols carved into bone over 3,000 years ago. It's one of the longest continuously used writing systems in all of human history, an unbroken thread connecting the present to the ancient past. The Shang dynasty also mastered something that would change warfare, agriculture, and art forever: bronze. By combining copper and tin, they created a metal stronger than either element alone. Shang bronzesmiths crafted vessels of breathtaking beauty and complexity, some weighing hundreds of pounds, decorated with intricate designs of dragons, mythical creatures, and geometric patterns. These weren't crude tools, they were works of art that required tremendous skill, precise temperature control, and an understanding of metallurgy that took generations to develop. Close your eyes and imagine the glow of the furnace, the master craftsman watching the molten bronze, knowing exactly when the moment was right. Let yourself drift now across the ocean, to a land of jungles and pyramids, where the Maya civilization flourished in Mesoamerica. The Maya weren't a single empire but rather a collection of city-states spread across what is now Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. And they possessed mathematical and astronomical knowledge that was extraordinary for their time, or any time, really. The Maya developed the concept of zero independently, one of only a few civilizations in human history to do so. This might not sound dramatic, but the invention of zero is one of the greatest intellectual achievements in human history. It allows for complex mathematics, for place value systems, for the ability to calculate and record with precision. And calculate they did. Mayan astronomers, working without telescopes, tracked the movements of Venus with such accuracy that their calculations were off by only 2 hours over a period of 500 years. Think about that, 2 hours in 5 centuries. They watched the sky night after night, generation after generation, recording their observations on bark, paper, and stone. They predicted eclipses, understood the cycles of the planets, and created a calendar so sophisticated it has fascinated scholars for generations. The Maya long count calendar tracked cycles spanning thousands of years, revealing their belief that time was vast, cyclical, and worthy of the most careful study. Now let your mind return to the Mediterranean, to ancient Greece, where philosophy and democracy were taking root. In Athens, around 508 BCE, a statesman named Cleisthenes introduced a radical new system of government, democratia, ruled by the people. For the first time in recorded history, ordinary citizens had a direct say in how they were governed. Male citizens would gather in the agora, the public square, to debate and vote on laws, policies, and leaders. It wasn't perfect, women, slaves, and foreigners couldn't participate, but it planted a seed that would grow across millennia. The idea that people could govern themselves, that every voice could matter, that decisions could be made through discussion and consensus rather than the whim of a single ruler, this was revolutionary. Let that idea wash over you now, the birth of democracy, born in dusty squares under Mediterranean sun. Greeks gave us something else too, something that still echoes in our language and thought. Around 400 BCE, the great philosopher Hippocrates established principles of medicine that shifted healing from the realm of superstition to the realm of observation and reason. The Hippocratic Oath, which bears his name, set ethical standards for physicians, standards about doing no harm, about putting the patient's well-being first, about maintaining confidentiality. Even today, over 2,000 years later, doctors around the world still honor principles that originated with this ancient Greek physician and his followers. Medicine became not just a craft, but a calling, not just a skill, but a sacred trust. Drift with me now to Persia, to the vast empire of Cyrus the Great, who ruled from 559 to 530 BCE. Cyrus conquered an enormous territory, stretching from the Mediterranean to India, but what makes him remarkable wasn't just the size of his empire, it was how he ruled it. When Cyrus conquered the great city of Babylon in 539 BCE, he did something almost unprecedented for a conqueror of his time. He freed the enslaved peoples, allowed them to return to their homelands, and let them practice their own religions. The Cyrus cylinder, a clay artifact inscribed with his declaration, is sometimes called the first charter of human rights. In it, Cyrus proclaimed that people should not be persecuted for their beliefs. Imagine that, in an age of conquest and forced conversion, here was a ruler who chose tolerance, who understood that an empire could be held together not just by force, but by respect. The Persians also created something that seems simple but was absolutely revolutionary for its time: a road system. The royal road stretched over 1,600 miles from Sardis to Susa, with relay stations positioned along the way. Persian messengers, the predecessors of all postal systems, could traverse this distance in just 7 days, riding fresh horses stationed at each post. Before this, information traveled slowly, at the pace of a walking merchant or a sailing ship. But now, messages could fly across the empire. Knowledge, orders, news, all could move faster than ever before. This network of roads didn't just connect cities, it connected peoples, ideas, and cultures. Let your breathing slow now, deep and steady, as we travel to ancient Rome, to the heart of an empire that would shape Western civilization for centuries to come. The Romans are often remembered for their military might, their gladiators and their conquests, but perhaps their greatest legacy is something far less dramatic: their engineering. Roman engineers built aqueducts that carried fresh water across miles of countryside, through mountains and over valleys, using only the power of gravity. Some of these aqueducts still stand today, nearly 2,000 years later, their arches stretching across the landscape like stone ribbons. The Pont du Gard in France, built in the 1st century CE, is 3 tiers of arches stacked atop one another, carrying water over a river gorge. No mortar holds the stones together, just precise cutting and the patience of countless workers, fitting each stone perfectly into place. The Romans also gave us concrete, not just any concrete, but a special formula using volcanic ash that could actually set underwater and grow stronger over time. Their concrete structures have lasted millennia, while many modern concrete buildings crumble after just decades. Sometimes the ancients knew secrets we're only now rediscovering. Let all these civilizations blend together now in your mind, like watercolors flowing into one another. The Chinese oracle bones crackling with heat. Mayan astronomers tracking Venus. Greek citizens debating in the agora. Persian messengers riding through the night. Roman aqueducts carrying cool water under warm Mediterranean sun. All of them reaching, building, discovering. All of them adding their verse to the great human story. Rest now, and let these ancient voices carry you gently into dreams. As you sink deeper into relaxation, let your mind wander to the sands of North Africa, to the ancient city of Carthage. Founded by Phoenician settlers around 814 BCE, Carthage grew into one of the wealthiest and most powerful cities of the ancient world. But the Phoenicians gave humanity something far more valuable than trade routes or ships. They gave us the alphabet. Around 1050 BCE, these seafaring merchants developed a writing system that used just 22 simple symbols, each representing a single sound. Unlike the complex hieroglyphs of Egypt or the intricate cuneiform of Mesopotamia, which required years of study to master, the Phoenician alphabet was elegant in its simplicity. Anyone could learn it. And as Phoenician traders sailed across the Mediterranean, they carried this alphabet with them like seeds on the wind. The Greeks adapted it. The Romans modified it. And eventually, this simple system of symbols became the foundation for most Western alphabets, including the letters you use every single day. Every time you write your name, you're using a gift from ancient sailors who traded purple dye and cedar wood thousands of years ago. Now drift with me to the fertile lands of ancient Mesopotamia once more, but in a different age. In the city of Babylon, around 1750 BCE, King Hammurabi created something that would echo through all of legal history, a comprehensive code of laws. The Code of Hammurabi contained 282 laws carved into a massive stone pillar, or stele, nearly 8 feet tall. These weren't just random rules but a structured legal system covering everything from property rights to family disputes, from trade contracts to criminal justice. What made this code revolutionary was that it was written down and displayed publicly, where anyone could see it. Justice was no longer just the whim of a powerful ruler, it was codified, predictable, based on established principles. The laws themselves could be harsh by modern standards, following the principle of an eye for an eye, but the very idea that law should be consistent, public, and applied equally marked a turning point in human civilization. Imagine standing before that towering stone pillar, reading the laws that governed your life, knowing that even kings were bound by these carved words. Let your thoughts drift now across deserts and mountains to ancient Persia once more, but to a later era. Around 500 BCE, the Persian Empire developed a sophisticated communication system that would be the envy of any modern organization. They established the Chaparkhana, an imperial postal system with stations every 14 miles along the royal road. Fresh horses, food, and rest awaited the messengers, who wore distinctive clothing so they could be recognized and given priority. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote admiringly of these Persian couriers. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. These words, written about Persian messengers 2,500 years ago, would later inspire the unofficial motto of the United States Postal Service. The ancient Persians understood something profound, that the swift movement of information was just as important as the movement of armies or goods. Travel with me now to the Indus Valley again, but let's consider something remarkable about the people who lived there. The Harappan civilization, which we visited earlier, existed for nearly 1,000 years, from approximately 2,500 to 1,500 BCE. And yet, in all the archaeological evidence we've found, there are no grand palaces, no monuments to individual kings, no clear signs of a ruling class living in opulence while others suffered. The houses in Harappan cities, while varying in size, don't show the extreme disparities found in other ancient civilizations. This has led many scholars to believe that the Harappans may have had a more egalitarian society than most of their contemporaries. We may never know for certain, but the possibility is intriguing, a civilization that thrived for a millennium without the massive inequality that characterized so many ancient societies. Perhaps they had discovered a different way of organizing themselves, one that valued cooperation over hierarchy. Now let yourself be carried on gentle winds to ancient China again, to a time around 200 BCE, during the Han Dynasty. The Chinese had discovered something remarkable, a way to record information that was lighter than stone, more portable than clay, and more durable than silk. They had invented paper. Using plant fibers, bamboo, mulberry bark, hemp, They created sheets that could be written upon, rolled up, and transported with ease. Before paper, books were rare and precious, carved in stone or written on expensive materials. But paper democratized knowledge. Ideas could spread more quickly. Libraries could grow larger. Education could reach more people. The technique would eventually travel along the Silk Road, reaching the Islamic world by the 8th century CE and Europe by the 12th century. By then, paper had already transformed Chinese society, enabling the growth of literature, philosophy, and bureaucracy on a scale never before possible. Drift deeper now, back to the Mediterranean, to the island of Sicily, where the Greek mathematician and inventor Archimedes lived in the 3rd century BCE. Archimedes was a man who lived between the world of pure thought and practical application. He discovered the principle of buoyancy, the reason ships float, while taking a bath. Legend says he was so excited by his discovery that he leaped from the tub and ran through the streets of Syracuse shouting "Eureka! I have found it." But Archimedes gave us more than colorful stories. He calculated an accurate approximation of pi, understood the principles of levers and pulleys, and allegedly designed elaborate machines to defend his city from Roman siege. He once said, "Give me a place to stand, and I shall move the earth," expressing his understanding that with the right lever and fulcrum, even impossible tasks become possible. Archimedes reminds us that curiosity and wonder can lead to profound discoveries, that a moment of insight in a bathtub can unlock secrets of the universe. Let your mind wander now to ancient Egypt once more, but to a different marvel, the Library of Alexandria, founded around 300 BCE. This wasn't just a library as we think of them today. It was the greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world, a place where scholars from across the Mediterranean and beyond came to study, debate, and discover. At its height, the library may have held over 500,000 scrolls, containing works of literature, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Imagine walking through those halls, scrolls stacked from floor to ceiling, the smell of papyrus and ink, the quiet scratch of styluses, scholars from Egypt, Greece, Persia, and India all gathered in one place, sharing knowledge across cultures and languages. The library's directors sought to collect every book in the known world. Ships that docked at Alexandria's port had their books confiscated, copied by the library's scribes, and then returned, or sometimes the copies were returned while the library kept the originals. Knowledge was treasure, and the library was determined to hoard it for the benefit of all humanity. Now, as your breathing becomes slower still, travel to South America, to the high Andes Mountains, where the Inca civilization would later flourish. But before the Inca, there were the Nazca people, who lived in the arid coastal plains of Peru between 100 BCE and 800 CE. And they left behind one of the most mysterious legacies of the ancient world, the Nazca lines. Etched into the desert floor are enormous geoglyphs, straight lines stretching for miles, geometric shapes, and massive figures of animals, a hummingbird with a wingspan of over 300 feet, a spider, a monkey, a condor. These lines were created by removing the reddish pebbles from the surface to reveal the lighter ground beneath. But here's what makes them truly mysterious. Many of these figures can only be fully appreciated from the air, hundreds of feet above the ground. Why would an ancient people, with no known flying technology, create artwork that could only be properly seen from the sky? Were they messages to the gods? Astronomical calendars? Sacred pathways? We still don't know. The Nazca Lines remain one of archaeology's most beautiful mysteries, preserved by the dry desert climate, waiting silently for us to understand their purpose. Let all these ancient wonders settle softly in your mind like falling leaves. The Phoenician alphabet spreading across seas. Hammurabi's laws carved in stone. Persian messengers riding through the night. Chinese paper flowing with poetry. Archimedes in his bath, struck by sudden understanding. The Library of Alexandria glowing with lamplight. The Nazca Lines stretching across the desert, seen only by birds and gods. Each civilization a thread, weaving together into the great tapestry of human history. Rest peacefully now, cradled by these ancient stories. Let your mind drift now to ancient Rome again, but to a time of entertainment and spectacle. The Colosseum, completed in 80 CE under Emperor Titus, stands as one of the most iconic structures of the ancient world. This massive amphitheater could hold between 50,000 and 80,000 spectators, and what's truly remarkable is the engineering brilliance behind it. The Romans designed a complex system of tunnels and chambers beneath the arena floor called the hypogeum. Through this underground network, gladiators, animals, and stage sets could be raised up through trap doors, appearing suddenly in the arena as if by magic. But there's something else fascinating about the Colosseum. It had a retractable awning system called the velarium, made of canvas and controlled by sailors from the Roman Navy. On hot days, this enormous fabric roof could be extended to provide shade for the spectators. Imagine the coordination required, the engineering skill, to create a retractable roof for a structure that could hold as many people as a modern sports stadium, nearly 2,000 years ago. Now let yourself float eastward, across deserts and along ancient trade routes, to the Silk Road. This wasn't a single road, but rather a vast network of trade routes connecting east and west, stretching over 4,000 miles from China to the Mediterranean. Along these routes, beginning around 200 BCE, more than just silk traveled. Spices, precious metals, glass, paper, and gunpowder moved west. Wool, gold, silver, and ideas moved east. But perhaps most importantly, the Silk Road was a highway for ideas, religions, and technologies. Buddhism spread from India to China along these routes. Mathematical concepts traveled from India to the Islamic world. Art styles blended and evolved as merchants from different cultures met in bustling caravanserais, those roadside inns where travelers could rest, trade stories, and exchange goods. The Silk Road reminds us that civilizations have never truly been isolated. They have always touched, influenced, and enriched one another. Drift with me now to Mesoamerica again, to the great city of Teotihuacan, which flourished between 100 and 650 CE in the Valley of Mexico. At its peak, Teotihuacan was one of the largest cities in the ancient world, home to perhaps 125,000 people, larger than most European cities of the time. The city was built on a magnificent scale, with the Avenue of the Dead running through its heart, leading to the massive Pyramid of the Sun, which rises 216 feet high and contains about 1 million cubic yards of material. But what makes Teotihuacan especially intriguing is that we don't know who built it. The city was already ancient and abandoned by the time the Aztecs arrived centuries later. The Aztecs gave it the name Teotihuacan, meaning the place where the gods were created, believing it was so magnificent that only divine beings could have built it. The identity of its builders, their language, their beliefs, all remain shrouded in mystery. Sometimes the greatest monuments are built by peoples whose names have been forgotten, but whose achievements still take our breath away. Let your thoughts travel now to ancient Africa, to the kingdom of Kush, located in what is now Sudan. Between 2500 BCE and 350 CE, the Kushites built a civilization that was at various times a rival to, a trading partner with, and even a conqueror of Egypt. Around 750 BCE, Kushite kings actually conquered Egypt and ruled as the 25th dynasty of pharaohs for nearly a century. But the Kushites left their own remarkable legacy in the form of pyramids, not in Egypt, but in their own land. At the royal burial sites of El Kuru, Nuri, and Meroe, the Kushites built over 200 pyramids, smaller and steeper than their Egyptian counterparts, but impressive nonetheless. In fact, there are more pyramids in Sudan than in Egypt, though they're far less famous. The Kingdom of Kush also developed its own writing system, Meroitic script, which, like the Indus Valley script, remains undeciphered to this day. These African pyramids stand quietly in the desert, reminders that Egypt was not alone in its grandeur, that African civilizations built wonders that deserve to be remembered. Now let yourself be carried to ancient India, to a time around 260 BCE, when Emperor Ashoka ruled most of the Indian subcontinent. Ashoka began his reign as a fierce conqueror, but after witnessing the terrible bloodshed of the Kalinga War, he underwent a profound transformation. He converted to Buddhism and dedicated the remainder of his rule to peace, tolerance, and the welfare of his people. Ashoka erected pillars and rocks throughout his empire, inscribed with edicts promoting moral behavior, religious tolerance, and compassionate governance. These edicts, written in multiple languages so all his subjects could read them, advocated for the humane treatment of animals, the establishment of hospitals, and respect for all religious traditions. One edict reads, "All men are my children. Just as I seek welfare and happiness in this world and the next for my own children, I seek the same for all men." In an age of conquest and empire, here was a ruler who chose compassion, who understood that true strength lies not in domination but in kindness. The Ashoka Chakra, the wheel from his pillars, is today the centerpiece of India's national flag, a lasting symbol of his legacy. Drift deeper now, to ancient Greece once more, to the island of Kos, where around 400 BCE, the physician Hippocrates and his followers made another crucial medical discovery. They observed that diseases weren't punishments from angry gods or the result of evil spirits, but natural phenomena with natural causes. They believed in the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and though this theory was incorrect by modern standards, the approach was revolutionary. For the first time, physicians were systematically observing patients, recording symptoms, and looking for patterns. They understood that the body had a natural ability to heal itself, and that a doctor's role was to support this process. The Hippocratic physicians also emphasized the importance of diet, exercise, and lifestyle in maintaining health, concepts that seem obvious now but were groundbreaking then. They moved medicine from the realm of magic into the realm of science, from superstition to observation. Let your mind wander now to ancient Mesopotamia once more, to the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. According to ancient accounts, these gardens were built around 600 BCE by King Nebuchadnezzar II for his wife, Amytis, who missed the green hills and valleys of her homeland. The gardens were said to be a series of tiered terraces rising up to 75 feet high, filled with trees, shrubs, and flowers, irrigated by a complex system that drew water from the Euphrates River. Picture cascading greenery in the heart of a dusty desert city, a paradise built from love and engineering skill. Remarkably, though ancient writers described these gardens in detail, archaeologists have never definitively found their remains. Some scholars wonder if they existed at all, or if perhaps they were actually in Nineveh rather than Babylon. The Hanging Gardens exist in that liminal space between history and legend, real enough to be recorded by multiple ancient sources, yet elusive enough to escape modern discovery. Finally, as you sink into even deeper relaxation, travel to ancient China during the Qin dynasty. In 221 BCE, Emperor Qin Shi Huang unified China for the first time, creating a centralized empire from warring states. But he's perhaps most famous for what he had built for his afterlife. Near the city of Xi'an, buried underground for over 2,000 years until its accidental discovery in 1974, lies the Terracotta Army. More than 8,000 life-sized clay soldiers, each with unique facial features, along with horses, chariots, and weapons, were created to guard the emperor in death. No two faces are exactly alike. Each warrior was individually crafted, each given distinct characteristics, expressions, and details. Imagine the workshops where these figures were created, the artists who sculpted each face, knowing their work would be buried in darkness, never to be seen by human eyes. The Terracotta Army wasn't created for public display or to impress the living. It was created for the afterlife, for an emperor who wanted his power to extend beyond death itself. They stood in silent formation for over 2 millennia, waiting in the darkness, an army that never saw battle, guardians of a tomb and keepers of ancient secrets. Let these images settle gently in your mind now. The Colosseum's ingenious underground chambers. Silk Road caravans crossing moonlit deserts. The mysterious builders of Teotihuacan. Kushite pyramids rising from African sands. Ashoka's pillars of compassion. The legendary gardens hanging in Babylonian air. 8,000 clay warriors standing eternally at attention. Each story a whisper from the past, each civilization a dream that once was real. Rest now, and let history carry you softly towards sleep. As your body grows heavier and more relaxed, let your mind drift to ancient Rome once more, but this time to its network of roads. The Romans built over 250,000 miles of roads throughout their empire, and their main highways were engineering marvels that have lasted 2 millennia. The phrase "all roads lead to Rome" wasn't just a metaphor, it was nearly literal. These roads were built in layers, large stones for the foundation, followed by smaller stones and gravel, then sand, and finally flat paving stones on top, carefully fitted together and slightly curved to allow rainwater to drain off. Some of these Roman roads are still in use today, still carrying traffic after 2,000 years. The Via Appia, built in 312 BCE, stretched from Rome to the southern port of Brindisi, and you can still walk sections of it, your feet touching the same stones that Roman legions marched upon. The Romans understood something profound, that lasting infrastructure requires patience, precision, and a willingness to invest in the future, even if you won't live to see the full benefit of your work. Now let yourself float to the ancient Middle East, to the city of Jerusalem, around the 10th century BCE, during the reign of King Solomon. Solomon's Temple, also known as the First Temple, was built as the central place of worship for the ancient Israelites. According to biblical accounts, it took 7 years to build and was constructed with cedars of Lebanon, its interior overlaid with pure gold. But Solomon's importance goes beyond architecture. He became legendary for his wisdom. One famous story tells of two women claiming to be the mother of the same infant. Solomon proposed cutting the baby in half so each woman could have an equal share. One woman agreed, but the other begged Solomon to give the child to her rival rather than harm it. Solomon knew then who the true mother was, the one willing to give up her child to save its life. This story is echoed through millennia as an example of wise judgment, of seeing beyond words to the truth that lies beneath. Solomon's wisdom reminds us that true intelligence isn't just about knowledge, it's about understanding the human heart. Let your thoughts drift now across the ocean to the Americas, to the Olmec civilization, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica. Flourishing between 1500 and 400 BCE in the tropical lowlands of south-central Mexico, the Olmecs left behind one of the most mysterious and striking artifacts of the ancient world: massive stone heads, some weighing up to 50 tons and standing over 10 feet tall. These colossal heads were carved from single blocks of basalt, a volcanic rock, and each depicts a different individual with distinctive facial features, perhaps rulers or important leaders. What makes these heads even more remarkable is that the nearest source of basalt was over 50 miles away. Somehow, without the wheel or beasts of burden, the Olmecs transported these enormous stones through swamps and rivers to carve and erect them. The Olmecs also developed one of the earliest writing systems in the Americas and created a complex calendar. They influenced all the great civilizations that followed in Mesoamerica. The Maya, the Zapotec, the Aztec, all drew inspiration from Olmec culture. Sometimes the most influential civilizations are the ones we know the least about. Now drift with me to ancient Phoenicia again, to the city of Tyre, famous for something that seems simple but was once worth more than gold: purple dye. The Phoenicians discovered that a particular species of sea snail, the murex, produced a deep, rich purple color when its gland was extracted and processed. But it took thousands upon thousands of these tiny snails to produce even a small amount of dye. The process was labor-intensive, time-consuming, and produced a terrible smell. Yet the color was unlike anything else in the ancient world, a purple so vivid, so permanent, that it became known as Tyrian purple or royal purple. This dye was so expensive that only the wealthiest individuals could afford clothing dyed with it. Emperors, kings, and high priests wore purple as a symbol of their power and status. The phrase "born to the purple," meaning born into royalty, comes from this ancient luxury. The Phoenicians built their wealth not through conquest, but through commerce, finding something rare and precious and sharing it with the world, one snail at a time. Let yourself sink deeper now, traveling to ancient Babylon once more, to around 1800 BCE, to the reign of King Hammurabi. Beyond his famous law code, Hammurabi was also a master of diplomacy and administration. He maintained extensive correspondence with rulers throughout Mesopotamia, and archaeologists have found hundreds of letters written on clay tablets, letters discussing treaties, trade agreements, complaints about delayed shipments, requests for medical help. These letters reveal something touching, that ancient rulers dealt with the same frustrations, the same diplomatic challenges, the same human concerns that we face today. In one letter, Hammurabi complains that a promised shipment of timber hasn't arrived. In another, he asks a fellow king to send a doctor to treat an illness. These mundane details remind us that behind the grand monuments and sweeping conquests, ancient peoples lived daily lives filled with the same small worries and needs as our own. Now let your mind wander to ancient Greece, to the sanctuary of Delphi, perched on the slopes of Mount Parnassus. For over 1,000 years, from the 8th century BCE onward, Delphi was considered the center of the world, the place where mortals could communicate with the gods. The Oracle of Delphi, always a woman known as the Pythia, would enter a trance-like state and deliver prophecies on behalf of Apollo. Kings, generals, and ordinary people traveled from across the Mediterranean to consult the oracle before making important decisions, whether to go to war, whom to marry, where to found a new city. The prophecies were famously ambiguous, open to multiple interpretations. When King Croesus asked if he should attack Persia, the oracle replied that if he did, he would destroy a great empire. Encouraged, Croesus attacked and destroyed his own empire in the process. The Oracle of Delphi reminds us that humans have always sought guidance, always looked for signs and meaning in an uncertain world, always hoped that someone, somewhere, knew what the future held. Travel with me now to ancient China, to a time around 105 CE during the Han Dynasty, when a court official named Kai Luan made improvements to papermaking that would revolutionize the world. While paper had been invented earlier, Kai Luan refined the process, experimenting with different materials, tree bark, hemp, rags, and fishing nets, to create paper that was smoother, more consistent, and easier to produce in large quantities. His method spread throughout China and eventually across the world. But here's something poignant: Kai Luan became caught up in political intrigue at court. Facing disgrace and likely execution, he chose to take his own life. Yet his innovation outlived him by millennia, touching billions of lives. The paper you write on, the books you read, the documents that record our history, all owe a debt to a court official who lived nearly 2,000 years ago and who never knew how profoundly his work would change the world. Finally, let yourself drift to ancient Egypt once more, but this time to consider something we often take for granted: the calendar. The ancient Egyptians developed one of the first solar calendars around 3000 BCE. They noticed that the star Sirius rose just before the sun approximately every 365 days, and that this event coincided with the annual flooding of the Nile. So they created a calendar with 365 days, divided into 12 months of 30 days each, with 5 extra days added at the end. This wasn't perfect, it didn't account for the extra quarter day, which is why we now have leap years, but it was remarkably accurate for its time. The Egyptian calendar became the basis for the Julian calendar, which in turn influenced our modern Gregorian calendar. Every time you check the date, every time you plan for next month or next year, you're using a system that has its roots in ancient Egyptian priests watching the stars rise over the Nile, tracking the rhythms of the cosmos and the seasons. Let all these ancient voices blend together now in a gentle chorus. Roman roads stretching to horizons. Solomon's wisdom revealing the truth. massive Olmec heads staring through millennia, purple dye from thousands of tiny shells, Hammurabi's letters on clay, the oracle's cryptic prophecies echoing in mountain air, Kailouan refining paper by lamplight, Egyptian priests marking the passage of days and years. All of them human, just like you. All of them trying to make sense of the world, to build something lasting, to leave behind knowledge for those who would come after. Let yourself rest now in the embrace of these ancient stories, each one a lullaby from the past. As you drift deeper into tranquility, let your mind travel to ancient Mesopotamia once more, to the city of Ur, around 2100 BCE. Here stood a magnificent structure called a ziggurat, a massive stepped pyramid made of mud bricks, rising in tiers toward the sky. The great ziggurat of Ur was built to honor Nana, the moon god, and it would have dominated the flat landscape of southern Mesopotamia, visible for miles around. Unlike Egyptian pyramids, which were tombs, ziggurats were temples, places where the earthly and divine realms could meet. Priests would climb the long staircases to the shrine at the top to perform rituals and make offerings. The word ziggurat comes from an ancient Akkadian word meaning to build on a raised area or mountain. For people living in the flat plains of Mesopotamia, mountains were foreign, mysterious, closer to the heavens, so they built their own mountains, brick by brick, reaching upward toward the gods. The ziggurat reminds us that humans have always sought to bridge the gap between earth and sky, between the mortal and the eternal. Now let yourself float across time and space to ancient Greece, to the city-state of Sparta, around 650 BCE. While Athens is remembered for philosophy and democracy, Sparta is famous for something quite different, its military culture. But there's something about Spartan society that often goes unmentioned: the unusual status of Spartan women. Unlike women in most ancient Greek city-states, Spartan women received physical education and athletic training. They were expected to be strong and healthy so they could bear strong children. They could own and inherit property, manage estates, and had far more freedom and influence than their Athenian counterparts. While their husbands were away at war, which was often, Spartan women effectively ran society. Ancient writers from other Greek cities were often scandalized by how much freedom Spartan women enjoyed. It's a reminder that even in the ancient world, different societies made different choices about gender roles, and that some ancient women had rights and freedoms that wouldn't be matched in Europe for another 2,000 years. Let your thoughts drift now to ancient Persia, to the reign of Darius the Great, who ruled from 522 to 486 BCE. Darius inherited a vast empire and set about organizing it in a way that was revolutionary for its time. He divided the empire into provinces called satrapies, each governed by a satrap who collected taxes and maintained order. But Darius didn't just trust his governors blindly. He created a system of inspectors called the King's Eyes and Ears who traveled throughout the empire, reporting directly to him about conditions in each province. This system of checks and balances helped prevent corruption and rebellion. Darius also standardized coinage throughout the empire, making trade easier. The gold daric, named after Darius himself, became a trusted currency across the ancient world. On one side, it showed the king kneeling with a bow and spear, a reminder that even the mightiest ruler must remain vigilant. Darius understood that maintaining an empire required not just conquest, but organization, communication, and trust built through consistent, fair governance. Now drift with me to ancient India, to the Mauryan Empire around 300 BCE, and to a text called the Arthashastra. Written by the philosopher Chanakya, this remarkable work is essentially an ancient treatise on statecraft, economics, and military strategy. It covers everything from taxation policy to espionage, from the duties of a king to the management of forests and mines. What's striking about the Arthashastra is how pragmatic and sophisticated it is. It discusses the importance of a good intelligence network, the need for welfare programs to help the poor, and the value of maintaining a strong treasury. It even recommends that rulers employ female spies, reasoning that women could go places and gather information that men could not. The Arthashastra reminds us that ancient thinkers grappled with the same challenges of governance that modern leaders face: how to maintain power while ensuring prosperity, how to balance strength with justice, how to build a state that endures. Let yourself sink even deeper now, traveling to ancient Rome, to the city of Pompeii in 79 CE. On August 24th of that year, Mount Vesuvius erupted with catastrophic force, burying Pompeii and the nearby town of Herculaneum under volcanic ash and pumice. The tragedy was immense, thousands died. But in that tragedy lies an extraordinary gift to history. The volcanic ash preserved everything it buried: buildings, streets, artwork, even loaves of bread left in ovens. When archaeologists began excavating Pompeii in the 18th century, they found a city frozen in time, a perfect snapshot of daily life in ancient Rome. We can walk the streets where Romans walked, see the graffiti they scrawled on walls, love declarations, political slogans, crude jokes. We can see the menu at a thermopolium, an ancient fast food restaurant, and the colorful frescoes that decorated wealthy homes. Pompeii gives us something rare in archaeology, not just monuments and temples, but the texture of ordinary life, the details that usually crumble and fade. Through tragedy, we can see clearly across 2,000 years. Now let your mind wander to ancient China once more, to the time of Confucius, who lived from 551 to 479 BCE. Confucius wasn't a ruler or a conqueror, he was a teacher, a philosopher who believed that society could be perfected through education, moral cultivation, and respect for tradition. His teachings emphasized filial piety, respect for one's parents and ancestors, and the importance of ritual and propriety in maintaining social harmony. Confucius believed that if everyone fulfilled their role properly, if rulers ruled justly, if children honored their parents, if friends were loyal to one another, then society would flourish naturally. His philosophy wasn't about rigid rules but about cultivating virtue and wisdom. After his death, his students compiled his teachings into the Analects, a collection of sayings and conversations that would influence Chinese culture for over 2 millennia. Confucius never held significant political power during his lifetime, yet his ideas shaped one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations. Sometimes the quietest voices echo the longest. Travel with me now to ancient Mesoamerica, to the Maya civilization once more, but this time to consider their writing system. The Maya developed the most sophisticated writing system in the pre-Columbian Americas, a complex script that combined logograms, symbols representing words, with syllabic signs, symbols representing sounds. This script could be written in various directions and was used to record history, astronomy, mythology, and royal lineages on stone monuments, pottery, and bark paper books called codices. For centuries after the Spanish conquest, Maya writing was considered indecipherable, its secrets lost. But in the 20th century, scholars began to crack the code, discovering that Maya texts weren't just religious incantations but detailed historical records of kings, wars, alliances, and dynastic politics. Suddenly, Maya rulers who had been anonymous became individuals with names, achievements, and personalities. The decipherment of Maya writing is like hearing voices that had been silent for centuries suddenly begin to speak again, telling their own stories in their own words. Finally, as you approach the edge of sleep, let yourself drift to ancient Mesopotamia one last time, to the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known works of literature, written around 2100 BCE. The epic tells the story of Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, who was 2/3 god and 1/3 human. After the death of his beloved friend Enkidu, Gilgamesh becomes obsessed with finding immortality. He undertakes a long, dangerous journey to discover the secret of eternal life. But in the end, he learns that immortality is not for mortals, that the only immortality we can achieve is through the deeds we do and the memories we leave behind. The epic ends with Gilgamesh returning to Uruk and taking pride in the city walls he built, the legacy he would leave for future generations. This ancient story, written on clay tablets over 4,000 years ago, grapples with questions that still haunt us. What does it mean to be human? How do we face mortality? What gives life meaning? Across all the centuries, the human heart asks the same questions, seeking the same answers. Let these final images settle into your consciousness like dust motes in still air. The ziggurat rising toward the moon. Spartan women training in the gymnasium. Darius's inspectors traveling the royal road. Pompeii frozen beneath ash. Confucius teaching in the shade of trees. Maya glyphs telling stories in stone. Gilgamesh returning home, wiser and more mortal. All these voices, all these stories, all these dreams of ancient peoples, woven together into the great tapestry of human experience. Rest now, surrounded by the wisdom of ages, cradled by the accumulated knowledge of millennia. Let the ancient world carry you gently into sleep. As you rest in this peaceful state, let your consciousness drift to ancient Egypt once more, to the Valley of the Kings, where pharaohs were laid to rest in elaborate tombs cut deep into the rock. In 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter made one of the most spectacular discoveries in the history of archaeology, the tomb of Tutankhamun, a pharaoh who died around 1323 BCE at only 18 or 19 years old. Unlike most royal tombs, which had been plundered in antiquity, King Tut's tomb was found nearly intact, containing over 5,000 objects, golden chariots, furniture, jewelry, weapons, and the famous golden death mask that covered the young king's mummified face. The mask weighs about 24 pounds and is made of solid gold and laid with lapis lazuli and other precious stones. When Carter first peered through a hole in the tomb's sealed doorway by candlelight, his patron asked if he could see anything. Carter replied simply, "Yes, wonderful things." That moment, standing at the threshold between the present and the ancient past, about to step into a room sealed for over 3,000 years, captures something magical about archaeology, about our connection to those who came before us. Now let yourself drift to ancient Greece, to the city of Alexandria again, but this time to consider a different marvel, the Lighthouse of Alexandria, also known as the Pharos. Built around 280 BCE on the island of Pharos in Alexandria's harbor, this lighthouse stood between 330 and 450 feet tall, making it one of the tallest structures in the ancient world. At its top burned a fire whose light, reflected by mirrors, could be seen from 30 miles away, guiding ships safely to harbor. The lighthouse stood for over 1,000 years, surviving until a series of earthquakes finally toppled it in the 14th century. Imagine the lighthouse keeper climbing hundreds of steps each evening to light the fire, knowing that his small act could mean the difference between life and death for sailors navigating the dark Mediterranean waters. The Pharos of Alexandria became so famous that the word Pharos became the root for the word lighthouse in many languages, phare in French, pharaoh in Italian and Spanish. Even after its stones fell into the sea, the lighthouse's memory lived on in language itself. Let your thoughts float now to ancient Persia, to a remarkable feat of engineering completed around 500 BCE. The Qanat system. In the arid regions of Persia, water was precious, and surface irrigation channels would lose enormous amounts to evaporation under the scorching sun. So Persian engineers developed qanats, underground channels that transported water from mountain aquifers to cities and farmland, sometimes over distances of 20 or even 30 miles. They dug vertical shafts down to the water table, then connected these shafts with gently sloping tunnels that allowed water to flow by gravity. You can still see the telltale signs of qanats in Iran today, lines of circular openings dotting the landscape, marking the vertical shafts. This system was so effective that many qanats built in ancient times are still in use today, still bringing water to thirsty land after 2.5 millennia. The qanat represents something beautiful, working with nature rather than against it, using patience and ingenuity to solve problems in ways that endure. Now drift with me to ancient Rome, to a remarkable innovation in architecture, the arch. While arches existed before Rome, the Romans perfected and popularized them, using arches to build structures of unprecedented scale. The arch is beautiful in its simplicity. Wedge-shaped stones called voussoirs are arranged in a curve, with a keystone at the top holding everything in place. The weight pressing down on the arch is transferred outward to the supporting pillars, allowing the structure to support enormous loads. This principle enabled Romans to build their famous aqueducts with multiple tiers of arches, to create vast interior spaces in their buildings with barrel vaults and groin vaults, and to construct bridges that still carry traffic today. The Romans understood that sometimes the strongest structures are those that distribute force cleverly rather than simply resisting it through brute mass. The arch teaches us that there are elegant solutions to seemingly impossible problems, if only we can see them. Let yourself sink deeper now, traveling to ancient China during the Han Dynasty, around 200 BCE, where Chinese astronomers made a remarkable discovery. They observed and recorded a guest star that appeared in the night sky, what we now know as a supernova, a massive stellar explosion. Chinese astronomers kept meticulous records of celestial phenomena, noting the appearance of comets, meteors, and unusual stellar events. These records, preserved for over 2,000 years, have proven invaluable to modern astronomers. In 1054 CE, Chinese astronomers recorded another guest star, the supernova that created the Crab Nebula. Because they recorded its exact position and appearance, modern scientists can study the aftermath of that cosmic event. The Chinese understood that the heavens were not static and unchanging as many ancient cultures believed, but dynamic and full of wonder. Night after night, they watched, recorded, and preserved their observations, creating a gift for astronomers they would never meet, living in a future they could barely imagine. Now let your mind wander to ancient India, to the development of a mathematical concept so fundamental we can hardly imagine mathematics without it, the decimal system. Indian mathematicians, building on earlier work, developed a place value system using 10 digits, including 0, around the 5th to 7th century CE. This system, far superior to the clunky Roman numerals or other ancient counting systems, made complex calculations possible. A mathematician named Brahmagupta, working in the 7th century, established rules for arithmetic with 0 and negative numbers. Later, around 800 CE, the Persian mathematician Al-Khwarizmi encountered this system and wrote about it, introducing it to the Islamic world. From there, it spread to Europe, where it gradually replaced Roman numerals. Today, the entire world uses this system, often calling them Arabic numerals in the West, though they originated in India. Every time you write a number, every time you calculate anything, you're using a system that Indian mathematicians developed over 1,000 years ago. Mathematics is one of humanity's most universal languages, and this language was refined in ancient India. Travel with me now to ancient Mesoamerica, to the Zapotec civilization, which flourished in the Oaxaca Valley of Mexico from around 500 BCE. The Zapotecs built the city of Monte Alban on a mountaintop, a remarkable feat of urban planning that required leveling the mountain's peak and constructing massive terraces. At its height, Monte Alban was home to perhaps 25,000 people. The Zapotecs were among the first Mesoamerican peoples to develop a writing system, leaving behind carved stone monuments with glyphs that recorded conquests, calendrical information, and ruler names. One particularly intriguing set of carvings, known as the danzantes or dancers, shows human figures in unusual poses. For years, scholars thought these were dancers, hence the name. But more recent interpretation suggests they actually depict slain enemies or sacrificial victims, their contorted positions representing death rather than dance. It's a reminder that interpreting ancient cultures is not always straightforward. Sometimes our first understanding is wrong, and the truth that emerges is darker, more complex, but ultimately more real. Finally, as you approach even deeper relaxation, let yourself drift to ancient Mesopotamia once more, to the city of Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar II, around 600 BCE. Babylon was a city of wonders, with its massive walls, its processional way lined with glazed brick lions, its towering ziggurat, and possibly the Hanging Gardens. But Babylon was also a center of astronomy. Babylonian priests were master astronomers who tracked the movements of planets, recorded eclipses, and developed mathematical models to predict celestial events. They divided the sky into the 12 constellations of the zodiac, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and so on, names we still use today. They understood that planets moved in predictable patterns, and they created tables that could predict planetary positions years in advance. When you read a horoscope, when you hear someone say I'm a Leo or Mercury is in retrograde, you're engaging with concepts that have their roots in ancient Babylonian astronomy. The Babylonians looked up at the night sky and saw order, pattern, meaning, and in seeing that order, They took the first steps toward modern astronomy. Let all these ancient marvels drift through your mind now like clouds across a moonlit sky. Tutankhamun's golden mask gleaming in candlelight. The Pharos lighthouse fire reflected in dark waters. Persian cannons flowing quietly underground. Roman arches distributing weight with perfect efficiency. Chinese astronomers recording guest stars. Indian mathematicians discovering the power of zero. Zapotec stone carvers creating monuments on mountaintops. Babylonian priests charting the zodiac. Each civilization reaching, discovering, building. Each one adding to the great sum of human knowledge. Rest deeply now, wrapped in the achievements of ages past. Let the wisdom of millennia carry you into peaceful dreams. As you rest in this state of profound calm, let your mind drift to ancient Greece once more, to the island of Samos, birthplace of the mathematician Pythagoras, who lived around 570 to 495 BCE. You may know Pythagoras for his famous theorem about right triangles, but he was much more than a mathematician. He founded a philosophical and religious movement whose followers, the Pythagoreans, believed that numbers were the fundamental essence of all things, that the universe itself was built on mathematical principles. They discovered that musical harmony was based on mathematical ratios, that pleasing sounds occurred when strings vibrated in simple proportional relationships. They looked at the world and saw patterns, ratios, beauty expressed in numbers. The Pythagoreans were also bound by strict rules. They were vegetarians, they believed in reincarnation, and according to some accounts, they weren't allowed to eat beans. Why beans were forbidden remains a mystery, lost to history. But their core insight, that mathematics underlies reality, has proven true in ways they could never have imagined. Every scientific law, every formula that describes how the universe works, echoes the Pythagorean vision of a cosmos built on number and proportion. Now let yourself float to ancient Rome, to the reign of Emperor Augustus, who ruled from 27 BCE to 14 CE. Augustus transformed Rome from a republic into an empire, and he knew the importance of communication and control. He established the cursus publicus, an advanced courier and transportation service for official government use. This system included way stations, fresh horses, and professional couriers who could carry messages quickly across the vast empire. But Augustus gave Rome something else, a period of relative peace known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, which lasted roughly 200 years. During this time, trade flourished, cities grew, art and literature thrived. It wasn't perfect, there were still wars on the frontiers, still oppression and slavery, but for much of the Mediterranean world, it was a time of unprecedented stability and prosperity. The Pax Romana reminds us that peace, even imperfect peace, creates space for human flourishing, for art, for thought, for the everyday happiness of ordinary people going about their lives without fear of invasion or upheaval. Let your thoughts drift now to ancient Africa, to the kingdom of Aksum, which flourished in what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea from around 100 to 940 CE. Aksum was a major trading power, with its port city of Adulis serving as a hub connecting Africa, Arabia, and the Mediterranean world. The Aksumites traded ivory, gold, emeralds, and frankincense. They developed their own written language, Guizi, which is still used today in Ethiopian Orthodox Church services. And around 330 CE, King Azana of Aksum converted to Christianity, making Aksum one of the first Christian kingdoms in the world, earlier than most of Europe. The Aksumites also erected massive stone obelisks, or stelae, some rising over 70 feet high, carved from single pieces of stone. These monuments marked royal tombs and demonstrated the kingdom's wealth and power. The Kingdom of Aksum issued its own coinage, one of only a handful of ancient African states to do so, with coins bearing the king's image and, after the conversion, the Christian cross. Aksum was a sophisticated, powerful civilization that connected continents, yet it's often overlooked in discussions of ancient empires. Africa's history is rich and deep, full of kingdoms that deserve to be remembered. Now drift with me to ancient Central Asia, to the region known as Bactria, roughly modern-day Afghanistan, where Alexander the Great arrived in 329 BCE during his campaigns of conquest. After Alexander's death, his empire fragmented, and in Bactria, a unique Greco-Bactrian kingdom emerged, blending Greek and Central Asian cultures. The cities of this kingdom were remarkable fusion centers where Greek art met Buddhist philosophy, where Greek columns stood beside Buddhist stupas. Some of the earliest representations of Buddha in human form, rather than as symbols, came from this region, created in a style influenced by Greek sculpture. This artistic tradition, known as Gandhara art, shows Buddha with wavy hair and flowing robes reminiscent of Greek gods. The Greco-Bactrian kingdom was eventually conquered and faded from history, but it left behind a beautiful legacy, proof that when cultures meet, rather than one destroying the other, they can create something entirely new, something that combines the best of both worlds. In the rugged mountains of Afghanistan, Greek traders spoke with Indian merchants, Buddhist monks studied Greek philosophy, and art transcended boundaries. Let yourself sink even deeper now, traveling to ancient China during the Qin dynasty, around 220 BCE. Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the same ruler who commissioned the Terracotta Army, undertook another massive project, connecting and extending walls built by earlier states to create what would eventually become the Great Wall of China. The wall we see today, the iconic stone structure photographed by millions of tourists, is actually from the Ming Dynasty, built much later. But the wall's origins go back to Qin Shi Huang's time, when hundreds of thousands of workers, including soldiers, peasants, and prisoners, labored to build defensive walls across northern China. The human cost was enormous. Many workers died during construction and were buried near or within the wall. The wall stretches over 13,000 miles if you count all its branches and sections, making it one of the largest construction projects in human history. It's often said you can see the Great Wall from space, though that's actually a myth. You can't see it with the unaided eye from orbit. But the myth itself speaks to something true. The Great Wall has captured human imagination for centuries, a monument to both human ambition and the price of that ambition. Now let your mind wander to ancient Greece once more, to the city of Athens in the 5th century BCE, to the great playwrights who invented drama as we know it. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides wrote tragedies that explored profound questions about fate, justice, pride, and human suffering. Their plays were performed in massive open-air theaters, like the Theater of Dionysus, which could hold up to 17,000 spectators. The actors wore masks and elevated shoes, their voices carrying to the distant rows through the theater's careful acoustic design. These weren't just entertainment, they were civic rituals, religious festivals, philosophical investigations performed before thousands of citizens. Sophocles' play Oedipus Rex explores the tragedy of a man trying to escape his fate, only to fulfill it through his very attempts to avoid it. Euripides' Medea examines revenge, betrayal, and the rage of a woman scorned. These plays, written 2,500 years ago, still speak to us because they grapple with timeless aspects of human nature. Every modern play, every film, every television drama owes a debt to these ancient Greek playwrights who first asked, "What if we could hold up a mirror to humanity and watch ourselves reflected on stage?" Travel with me now to ancient Mesoamerica, to the Maya city of Tikal, deep in the rainforests of Guatemala. Tikal was one of the most powerful Maya city-states, flourishing from about 200 to 900 CE. At its peak, Tikal may have had a population of 100,000 people or more, with massive pyramids rising above the jungle canopy. Temple 4, built around 740 CE, stands over 200 feet tall, and from its peak, you can see other temples emerging from the sea of green trees. The Maya built these monuments without metal tools, without the wheel, without beasts of burden. They used stone tools, human labor, and sophisticated engineering knowledge. Walking through Tikal today, with howler monkeys calling from the trees and ancient stones covered in moss and vines, you can feel the weight of time. These pyramids have stood for over 1,000 years, witnessed civilizations rise and fall, seen the jungle reclaim the plazas and palaces, and yet they endure. Tikal reminds us that even the mightiest cities are temporary, that nature is patient, that in the end, the jungle reclaims everything, but not before humans have left their mark, reaching skyward, building monuments to their gods and their glory. Finally, as you approach the deepest levels of relaxation, let yourself drift to ancient Rome once more, to consider their legal system. Roman law, developed over centuries, became one of Rome's most enduring legacies. The Romans created the concept of innocent until proven guilty, the idea that the burden of proof lies with the accuser, not the accused. They developed sophisticated legal principles governing contracts, property rights, inheritance, and civil liability. When the Roman Empire in the West fell in 476 CE, Roman law didn't disappear, it was preserved, studied, and adapted. In the 6th century CE, Emperor Justinian in the Eastern Roman Empire commissioned a massive codification of Roman law called the Corpus Juris Civilis. This work became the foundation for legal systems across Europe and, eventually, around the world. Modern concepts like habeas corpus, pro bono, and subpoena are Latin phrases inherited from Roman law. When you speak of legal precedent or the rule of law, you're using concepts that the Romans refined. Law, they understood, should be rational, consistent, and based on principles that transcend the whims of individual rulers. This idea, that we are governed by laws, not by men, is one of Rome's greatest gifts to civilization. Let these final images of this segment settle gently into your consciousness. Pythagoreans discovering music in mathematical ratios. The Pax Romana spreading peace across the Mediterranean. Axumite obelisks rising in African highlands. Greek and Buddhist art merging in distant Bactria. Workers building the Great Wall under harsh sun. Greek actors performing tragedy in massive theaters. Tikal's temples emerging from jungle mist. Roman legal scholars codifying laws by lamplight. all of them contributing to the great river of human civilization, each adding their waters to the flow. Rest now in the knowledge that you are part of this same river, this same story that stretches back millennia. Let the ancient world hold you gently as you drift towards sleep. As you rest in this tranquil state, let your mind drift to ancient Egypt once more, to the practice of mummification. The Egyptians believed that preserving the body was essential for the soul's journey to the afterlife. The mummification process was elaborate, taking 70 days to complete. First, embalmers would remove the internal organs, the lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines, and place them in special containers called canopic jars, each protected by a different god. The brain was removed through the nose using a long hook, though interestingly, the Egyptians considered the brain unimportant and discarded it. The heart, however, was left in the body, for the Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of intelligence and emotion. The body was then dried using natron, a type of salt, wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen, and placed in a decorated coffin. This careful preservation has allowed us to study ancient Egyptians intimately, to know what diseases they suffered from, what they ate, even what they looked like. Through mummification, the ancient Egyptians achieved a form of immortality, their bodies preserved for thousands of years, still teaching us about life in the ancient world. Now let yourself float to ancient Mesopotamia, to the city of Nineveh, capital of the Assyrian Empire around 700 BCE, during the reign of King Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal was a fierce warrior king, but he was also a scholar and collector of knowledge. He created what may have been the world's first systematically organized library, gathering over 30,000 clay tablets from across his empire. These tablets contained everything: royal correspondence, medical texts, astronomical observations, mathematical calculations, religious rituals, and literary works including the Epic of Gilgamesh. Ashurbanipal sent scribes throughout his realm with instructions to copy and collect texts. He wanted to preserve all knowledge, to gather the wisdom of ages in one place. When archaeologists discovered this library in the ruins of Nineveh in the 19th century, they found an astonishing treasure trove of information about ancient Mesopotamian civilization. Ashurbanipal understood something profound: that knowledge is power, yes, but also that knowledge is precious, worth preserving, worth protecting for future generations. In creating his library, this ancient king built a bridge across millennia, allowing us to hear voices from the dawn of civilization. Let your thoughts drift now to ancient China, to the Han Dynasty around 100 BCE, and to the opening of the Silk Road under Emperor Wu. Chinese silk was unlike anything the West had ever seen: shimmering, soft, luxurious fabric that seemed almost magical. The Chinese guarded the secret of silk production jealously, making it a capital offense to reveal the process or smuggle silkworm eggs out of the country. According to legend, it wasn't until around 550 CE that two monks, working for the Byzantine Empire, successfully smuggled silkworm eggs out of China by hiding them in hollow bamboo walking sticks. For centuries, the West knew only that silk came from China but had no idea how it was made. Some believed it grew on trees, others thought it came from a special flower. The mystery only added to silk's allure and value. A pound of silk was worth a pound of gold in ancient Rome. Emperors and aristocrats draped themselves in this fabric from the East, wearing on their bodies a secret that had traveled thousands of miles along dusty caravan routes. passed from merchant to merchant, each one knowing its value but not its origin. Now drift with me to ancient Greece, to the island of Kos once more, but this time to consider the Hippocratic corpus, a collection of around 60 medical texts attributed to Hippocrates and his followers. These texts represent a revolutionary approach to medicine. They rejected supernatural explanations for disease and instead sought natural causes and natural remedies. One text, on the sacred disease, discusses epilepsy, a condition many ancients believed was caused by divine intervention or demonic possession. The Hippocratic author argues that epilepsy is not sacred at all, but a disease of the brain like any other illness, and should be treated accordingly. This rational, scientific approach to medicine was radical. The Hippocratic corpus also contains detailed observations about the progression of diseases, the effects of climate and diet on health, and ethical guidance for physicians. These ancient Greek doctors were careful observers, noting symptoms, tracking disease patterns, learning from both successes and failures. They laid the groundwork for evidence-based medicine, for the idea that we can understand and treat illness through observation and reason rather than prayer and magic. Let yourself sink deeper now, traveling to ancient Persia once more, to the time of Xerxes I, who ruled from 486 to 465 BCE. Xerxes is perhaps best known for his attempted invasion of Greece, but there's something remarkable about Persian administration that often goes unnoticed. The Persian Empire was incredibly diverse, spanning 3 continents and including dozens of different peoples, languages, and religions. Yet the Persians managed this diversity with a relatively light touch. They allowed conquered peoples to keep their own customs, religions, and even local governance structures, as long as they paid taxes and acknowledged Persian authority. Official proclamations were issued in multiple languages, Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, so different peoples could understand them. This policy of tolerance wasn't just moral, it was practical. The Persians understood that an empire held together by respect and accommodation was stronger than one held together by force alone. When you govern with wisdom rather than just power, when you allow people to be themselves while still being part of something larger, you create stability that can last centuries. Now let your mind wander to ancient India once more, to the Mauryan Empire around 250 BCE, but this time to consider ancient Indian medicine. The practice of Ayurveda, which means science of life, was a sophisticated medical system that emphasized prevention, holistic health, and the balance of bodily systems. Ancient Indian physicians performed complex surgeries, including cataract removal, plastic surgery, and even early forms of cosmetic surgery. The surgeon Sushruta, who lived around 600 BCE, wrote a medical text that described over 300 surgical procedures and 120 surgical instruments. He performed rhinoplasty, reconstructive nose surgery, using a flap of skin from the forehead, a technique so effective it's still sometimes called the Indian method in modern plastic surgery. Indian physicians understood anatomy from dissection studies, used herbal medicines with real pharmacological effects, and emphasized the importance of cleanliness and proper sanitation, principles that wouldn't become standard in Western medicine until the 19th century. The sophistication of ancient Indian medicine reminds us that advanced medical knowledge existed in many ancient cultures, not just in Greece and Rome. Travel with me now to ancient Britain, to the mysterious monument of Stonehenge, built in several stages between 300 and 1500 BCE. The massive stones, some weighing up to 25 tons, were transported from quarries over 20 miles away. The smaller bluestones came from even farther, from the Preseli Hills in Wales, nearly 200 miles distant. How Neolithic people moved these enormous stones without wheels or modern technology remains a subject of debate, though experiments suggest they used wooden sledges, rollers, and sheer human determination. But the greater mystery is, why? Stonehenge is aligned with the summer solstice sunrise and the winter solstice sunset, suggesting it had astronomical or calendrical significance. Perhaps it was a temple, a healing center, an astronomical observatory, or a place to honor the dead. Archaeologists have found hundreds of cremated remains buried there. Stonehenge stands as a monument to human ambition and mystery, a place where our ancestors invested enormous labor to create something whose full purpose we may never completely understand. Sometimes the questions are more powerful than the answers. Finally, as you approach even deeper rest, let yourself drift to ancient Rome, to the year 79 CE once more, but this time to Herculaneum rather than Pompeii. Like its more famous neighbor, Herculaneum was buried by Vesuvius, but it was engulfed by a different type of volcanic material, pyroclastic flows of superheated gas and ash that carbonized organic materials rather than crushing them. This created a different kind of preservation. In Herculaneum, archaeologists found wooden furniture, door frames, even food, things that would have rotted away in most archaeological sites. Most remarkably, they discovered the Villa of the Papyri, which contained a library of over 1,800 carbonized papyrus scrolls. For centuries, these scrolls were too fragile to unroll. Opening them would destroy them. But recently, using advanced imaging technology including X-rays and artificial intelligence, scholars have begun to read these scrolls without unrolling them. They're discovering works by ancient philosophers that were thought lost forever. Imagine, words written 2,000 years ago, sealed in darkness by volcanic fire, now speaking to us again through the magic of modern technology. The past is not dead. Sometimes it's just sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake and share its secrets. Let these images settle into your mind like autumn leaves drifting to the ground. Egyptian embalmers working with sacred care. Ashurbanipal's library of clay tablets. Silk shimmering along desert trade routes. Hippocratic physicians observing and recording. Persian proclamations in multiple languages. Indian surgeons performing delicate operations. Stonehenge stones standing in eternal alignment. Herculaneum scrolls revealing their hidden words. All of human history is a conversation across time, each generation speaking to the next, sharing discoveries, preserving knowledge, building on what came before. You are part of that conversation, that great continuous human story. Rest now, peaceful and secure in the embrace of countless ages. As you rest in this state of complete relaxation, let your mind drift to ancient Rome once more, to the system of public baths that were central to Roman social life. The Romans built elaborate bathhouses, called thermae, throughout their empire. These weren't just places to bathe, they were social centers, places to exercise, conduct business, read, and socialize. The baths of Caracalla in Rome, completed around 216 CE, could accommodate over 1,600 bathers at once. The complex included hot rooms, caldarium, warm rooms, tepidarium, and cold rooms, frigidarium, along with swimming pools, libraries, gardens, and art galleries. The Romans engineered a sophisticated heating system called the hypocaust. Fires beneath the floors heated the rooms from below, and hollow walls allowed hot air to circulate, warming the entire building. Imagine the comfort of it, stepping from the cold streets of Rome into this warm, luxurious space, the marble gleaming, conversations echoing off the vaulted ceilings, the whole city coming together regardless of social class to enjoy the simple pleasure of a warm bath. The Romans understood that civilization isn't just about grand monuments, it's also about the everyday comforts that make life pleasant. Now let yourself float to ancient Egypt, to the reign of Queen Hatshepsut, who ruled from around 1479 to 1458 BCE. Hatshepsut was one of the few female pharaohs in Egyptian history, and she was one of the most successful. She came to power as regent for her young stepson, but eventually declared herself pharaoh, even adopting the traditional regalia including the false beard worn by male rulers. Under her rule, Egypt prospered through trade rather than conquest. She organized a famous expedition to the land of Punt, probably somewhere on the Red Sea coast of Africa, bringing back precious goods, myrrh trees, ebony, ivory, gold, and exotic animals. Hatshepsut built magnificent monuments, including her stunning mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, with its elegant terraces built into the cliffs. After her death, someone, possibly her stepson Thutmose III, tried to erase her from history, chiseling out her name and image from monuments. But they didn't succeed. Hatshepsut's legacy survived, a reminder that powerful women have always existed, even in ancient times, even when later generations tried to forget them. Let your thoughts drift now to ancient Greece, to the philosopher Aristotle, who lived from 384 to 322 BCE. Aristotle was a student of Plato and the tutor of Alexander the Great, but his greatest legacy was his systematic approach to knowledge. He wrote about everything: logic, ethics, politics, poetry, biology, physics, metaphysics. Aristotle was perhaps the first true scientist in the modern sense. He believed in careful observation of the natural world, in collecting data, in categorizing and analyzing. He dissected animals to understand their anatomy, observed the development of chicken embryos, and classified hundreds of species. His biological observations were remarkably accurate for their time. Though many of his conclusions would later be proven wrong, his method, observe, question, reason, conclude, became the foundation of scientific inquiry. For nearly 2,000 years, Aristotle's works were the cornerstone of Western philosophy and science. When you approach a problem systematically, when you observe carefully before drawing conclusions, you're following in the footsteps of this ancient Greek philosopher who believed that knowledge of all kinds was worth pursuing. Now drift with me to ancient Mesoamerica, to the Maya once more, but this time to consider their sacred ball game. The Maya, along with other Mesoamerican cultures, played a ritual ball game in specially built courts shaped like a capital I. Players had to keep a solid rubber ball. Yes, the Maya knew how to vulcanize rubber over 1,000 years before modern civilization rediscovered the process, in the air using only their hips, thighs, and forearms. The game had deep religious significance, sometimes representing the cosmic struggle between light and darkness, life and death. Ball courts have been found at most major Maya sites, and some were enormous, with stone walls rising over 25 feet high. In some versions of the game, there's evidence that the losing team, or perhaps their captain, was sacrificed to the gods. The ball game was more than sport, it was ritual, politics, and religion all rolled into one. It reminds us that for ancient peoples, the boundaries between sacred and secular, between play and prayer, were far more fluid than in our modern world. Let yourself sink even deeper now, traveling to ancient China during the Warring States period, around 400 BCE, to the philosopher Laozi, the legendary founder of Taoism. According to tradition, Laozi was an older contemporary of Confucius and wrote the Tao Te Ching, one of the most influential texts in Chinese philosophy. The Tao Te Ching speaks of the Tao, the way, an underlying principle that flows through all things. It advocates for Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action, the idea of moving with the natural flow of things rather than forcing outcomes. The softest things in the world overcome the hardest, Laozi wrote. Water, which yields to everything, eventually wears away stone. The Tao Te Ching teaches that there is power in gentleness, wisdom and simplicity, strength and flexibility. Whether Laozi was a real historical figure or a legendary compilation of various teachers, his philosophy has influenced Chinese culture for over 2 millennia, offering a counterbalance to the structured hierarchy of Confucianism with its emphasis on natural spontaneity and harmony. Now let your mind wander to ancient North Africa, to the city of Carthage once more, but this time to consider Hannibal Barca, one of history's greatest military commanders. During the Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BCE, Hannibal did something that seemed impossible. He marched an army from Spain to Italy over the Alps, bringing with him war elephants, massive African elephants trained for battle. The journey was brutal. Many men and most of the elephants died in the freezing mountain passes. But Hannibal emerged in Italy and proceeded to defeat the Romans in battle after battle, most famously at Cannae in 216 BCE, where he enveloped and destroyed a much larger Roman army. For 15 years, Hannibal remained in Italy, undefeated on the battlefield, Rome's greatest nightmare. Though Carthage ultimately lost the war and Hannibal died in exile, his military genius has been studied for over 2,000 years. His strategies are still taught in military academies today. Hannibal's campaign reminds us that sometimes the boldest plans, the ones that seem impossible, are the ones that come closest to succeeding. Travel with me now to ancient India once more, to consider the rock edicts of Emperor Ashoka that we touched on earlier, but this time focusing on a specific principle he promoted, ahimsa, or non-violence. After his conversion to Buddhism, Ashoka promoted ahimsa not just toward humans but toward all living beings. He established the first hospitals for animals, created gardens and shade trees along roads for travelers and their animals, and banned animal sacrifices in many contexts. This was radical. Most ancient rulers demonstrated their power through conquest and sacrifice. But Ashoka tried to rule through dharma, through righteousness and moral law. One of his edicts states, one should obey one's mother and father. One should speak the truth. These virtues of dharma should be practiced. He was promoting a revolution not of politics but of ethics, asking his subjects to transform themselves from the inside out. Though his empire didn't long survive him, his ideas, captured in stone, spread across his former realm, continued to influence Indian thought and Buddhist practice for centuries. Sometimes the greatest revolutions are not won with swords but with ideas. Now, as you approach the deepest levels of rest, let yourself drift to ancient Rome during its final centuries. In 410 CE, something happened that shocked the ancient world. Rome, the Eternal City, was sacked by Visigoths led by King Alaric. It was the first time in 800 years that Rome had fallen to an enemy. The psychological impact was enormous. People throughout the empire wondered, if Rome could fall, what did that mean for civilization itself? St. Augustine, witnessing this crisis, wrote The City of God, arguing that earthly kingdoms rise and fall, but the spiritual city of God endures forever. The fall of Rome in the West, traditionally dated to 476 CE when the last Western Roman emperor was deposed, marked the end of the ancient world and the beginning of the Middle Ages. But Rome didn't truly die. The Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, continued for another 1,000 years. Roman law, language, architecture, and ideas spread throughout Europe and beyond. The barbarians who conquered Rome adopted Roman ways, preserving and transforming Roman culture. Civilization proved more resilient than anyone thought. Even when empires fall, the ideas and innovations they create live on, transformed and reborn in new contexts. Finally, as you rest on the very edge of sleep, consider this: everything you've heard tonight, all these civilizations, all these innovations, all these human stories, they're all connected to you. The alphabet you use has roots in Phoenician trade. The democracy you might participate in echoes Athenian experiments. The medicine that heals you builds on Egyptian, Greek, Indian, and Chinese foundations. The numbers you count with came from India. The laws that govern society draw from Roman principles. The calendar you follow was refined in Egypt. You are the inheritor of all this accumulated wisdom, all these thousands of years of human striving, learning, building, discovering. Every ancient person who looked up at the stars and wondered, who tried to make life better, who preserved knowledge for the future, they were working for you, though they didn't know you would exist. And now, as you rest, you carry all of this forward into tomorrow. You are part of the great human story, the endless conversation across time. Rest now, knowing that you stand on the shoulders of countless generations, that you are connected to all who came before and all who will come after. Let the wisdom of ages cradle you gently as you drift into peaceful sleep, knowing that the story continues, that each dawn brings new chapters, and that you, too, are adding your verse to this ancient song of humanity. As you rest in profound stillness, let your mind drift to ancient Mesopotamia once more, to the city of Babylon during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II, around 600 BCE. Beyond the hanging gardens and the great walls, the Babylonians made another remarkable contribution, the discovery of the Pythagorean theorem, though Pythagoras wouldn't be born for another century. Clay tablets from this period show that Babylonian mathematicians understood the relationship between the sides of a right triangle long before the Greeks. One tablet, known as Plimpton 322, contains a sophisticated table of what we now call Pythagorean triples. The Babylonians were solving complex mathematical problems, using their base 60 number system to make calculations that still impress modern mathematicians. They understood that knowledge builds on knowledge, that mathematics is a language that transcends culture and time. When we use the Pythagorean theorem today, we're often crediting the wrong civilization. The insight belonged first to these ancient Mesopotamian scribes working by oil lamp light, scratching calculations into soft clay. Now let yourself float to ancient Japan, to the Jomon period, which lasted from around 14,000 BCE to 300 BCE, one of the longest continuous cultures in human history. The Jomon people were hunter-gatherers who created some of the oldest pottery in the world, dating back over 16,000 years. Their pottery was distinctive, decorated with cord-marked patterns. Jomon means cord-marked, and sometimes elaborate sculptural designs. But here's what makes the Jomon remarkable. They maintained a hunter-gatherer lifestyle while also creating sophisticated pottery, settled villages, and complex spiritual practices. Most cultures around the world transitioned to agriculture before developing pottery in permanent settlements, but the Jomon did it differently. Japan's abundant natural resources, fish, nuts, wild game, allowed them to live in one place without farming. The Jomon remind us that there's no single path to civilization, that different environments and circumstances lead to different solutions, and that all of them are valid expressions of human ingenuity. Let your thoughts drift now to ancient Rome, to the engineering marvel of the aqueducts we mentioned before, but this time consider a specific innovation, the siphon. While most Roman aqueducts used gravity to move water downhill gradually, sometimes the terrain required water to cross a valley. The Romans created inverted siphons, pipes that went down one side of a valley and up the other, using water pressure to push the water uphill on the far side. These siphons required perfect engineering. The pipes had to withstand enormous pressure, and the system had to be carefully calculated. The Romans used lead pipes, carefully sealed and tested. The Pont du Gard in France, which we mentioned earlier, is famous for its 3 tiers of arches, but it also incorporated a sophisticated siphon system. The Romans didn't just move water, they moved it uphill when necessary, defying what seemed like natural law through understanding and application of hydraulic principles. Now drift with me to ancient Greece, to the mathematician and engineer Archimedes once more, but this time to consider his death. In 212 BCE, during the Roman siege of Syracuse, the 75-year-old Archimedes was killed by a Roman soldier. According to legend, Archimedes was so absorbed in a mathematical problem, drawing geometric figures in the sand, that he didn't notice the Romans had breached the city walls. When a soldier approached, Archimedes allegedly said, "Do not disturb my circles," and was killed for his defiance. Whether the story is true or not, it captures something essential about Archimedes. Even in the face of death, even as his city fell around him, he was thinking about mathematics, lost in the beauty of geometric truth. His last words, whether real or legendary, speak to the power of intellectual curiosity, to the idea that some pursuits are so absorbing, so meaningful, that they transcend even mortal danger. Let yourself sink deeper now, traveling to ancient Africa, to the Nok culture of what is now Nigeria, which flourished from around 1500 BCE to 500 CE. The Nok people created remarkable terracotta sculptures, hollow clay figures of humans and animals, some life-sized, with elaborate hairstyles and detailed features. These are among the oldest sculptures found in sub-Saharan Africa, and their artistic sophistication is stunning. The Nok were also among the earliest ironworking cultures in West Africa, smelting iron ore to create tools and weapons. The combination of advanced metallurgy and sophisticated art suggests a complex, prosperous society. Yet much about the Nok remains mysterious. We don't know what language they spoke, what their society looked like, or why their culture eventually disappeared. Their beautiful terracotta heads, with their serene expressions and elaborate details, are windows into a lost world, reminders that Africa has always been home to advanced civilizations with rich artistic traditions. Now let your mind wander to ancient Persia once more, to the reign of Cyrus the Great, around 539 BCE, but this time to consider a specific innovation, the first declaration of human rights. When Cyrus conquered Babylon, he issued a decree, preserved on a clay cylinder, that freed slaves, allowed displaced peoples to return to their homelands, and proclaimed that people should be free to worship as they chose. The Cyrus Cylinder has been called the first charter of human rights, predating the Magna Carta by over 1,700 years. Whether Cyrus was motivated by genuine compassion or shrewd politics, or both, the result was revolutionary. He understood that empire could be maintained not just through force but through justice and tolerance. The Cyrus Cylinder is now housed in the British Museum, and a replica stands at the United Nations headquarters in New York, a testament to how an ancient decree still resonates with modern ideals of human dignity and freedom. Travel with me now to ancient China during the Han Dynasty once more, but this time to consider the invention of the seismoscope around 132 CE by the polymath Zhang Heng. This device, called the earthquake weather vane, was designed to detect earthquakes and indicate their direction. It was a large bronze vessel with 8 dragon heads around its circumference, each holding a ball in its mouth. Below each dragon was a bronze toad with an open mouth. When an earthquake occurred, even one too far away to be felt, a pendulum inside the vessel would trigger a mechanism that caused one of the dragons to release its ball into the mouth of the toad below, indicating the direction of the earthquake. This allowed the government to send aid quickly to affected regions, even before messengers could arrive with news. Zhang Heng's seismoscope was over 1,700 years ahead of its time. The first modern seismograph wasn't invented until the 1850s. It represents the Chinese genius for practical invention, for creating devices that served real human needs. Now, as you rest even more deeply, let yourself drift to ancient Mesoamerica, to the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, founded in 1325 CE on an island in Lake Texcoco. By the time Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1519, Tenochtitlan was one of the largest cities in the world, with a population estimated between 200,000 and 400,000, larger than most European cities of the time. The Aztecs built their city using a system of chinampas, or floating gardens, artificial islands made of mud and vegetation anchored to the lake bottom, where they grew crops. Causeways connected the island to the mainland, and aqueducts brought fresh water from distant springs. The city center featured massive pyramids, including the Templo Mayor, palaces, markets, and gardens. When Hernán Cortés first saw Tenochtitlan, he wrote that it was more beautiful than any city in Spain. The Spanish conquistador Bernal Díaz del Castillo wrote, "We were amazed, on account of the great towers and buildings rising from the water, and all built of masonry. And some of our soldiers even asked whether the things that we saw were not a dream." Tenochtitlan was eventually destroyed during the Spanish conquest, and Mexico City was built over its ruins. but its memory survives as testimony to the architectural and engineering brilliance of the Aztec civilization. Finally, let yourself drift to ancient Egypt one last time, to consider the role of cats in Egyptian society. Cats were not just pets, they were sacred animals associated with the goddess Batet, who represented home, fertility, and protection. Killing a cat, even accidentally, could be punishable by death. When a beloved cat died, family members would shave their eyebrows as a sign of mourning. Cats were sometimes mummified and buried with their owners, or in special cat cemeteries. One cemetery discovered at Beni Hassan contained over 80,000 cat mummies. The Egyptians valued cats for practical reasons too. They controlled vermin that threatened grain stores, but their reverence went beyond utility. They saw in cats something divine, their grace, their independence, their mysterious nature. The relationship between ancient Egyptians and cats reminds us that the bonds between humans and animals are ancient and profound, that we have always sought companionship and meaning in the creatures that share our world. Let these final images settle gently in your consciousness. Babylonian mathematicians discovering timeless truths. German potters shaping ancient clay. Roman engineers defying gravity with water. Archimedes absorbed in his circles. Knox sculptors creating serene terracotta faces. Cyrus proclaiming freedom on clay. Zhang Heng's bronze dragons detecting distant tremors. Tenochtitlan rising from the lake like a dream. Egyptian cats prowling through sacred temples. All of them part of the great tapestry, all of them threads in the fabric of human history. Rest peacefully now, knowing that you carry forward the legacy of all these ancient peoples, all these dreams made real, all these moments of brilliance preserved across the ages. As you rest in complete tranquility, let your mind drift one last time to ancient Rome, to the year 80 CE, when Mount Vesuvius erupted. But beyond Pompeii and Herculaneum, there's another story to tell. The eruption was witnessed and described by Pliny the Younger, who was staying across the Bay of Naples with his uncle, Pliny the Elder. Pliny the Elder was a naturalist, author, and naval commander, and when he saw the massive ash cloud rising from Vesuvius, his scientific curiosity was aroused. He sailed toward the eruption to observe it more closely and to rescue friends trapped near the volcano. He never returned. Pliny the Elder died, probably from inhaling toxic gases. His nephew's letters describing the eruption provide the only detailed eyewitness account we have of this catastrophe. They're so precise that volcanologists still use the term Plinian eruption to describe explosive volcanic events characterized by enormous eruption columns. Even in the face of disaster, even at the cost of his life, Pliny the Elder pursued knowledge. His death reminds us that curiosity and courage have always driven human understanding forward, sometimes at great personal cost. Now let yourself float to ancient India once more, to the great University of Nalanda, established around 427 CE in what is now Bihar. Nalanda wasn't just a school, it was one of the world's first residential universities, a vast complex that could house up to 10,000 students and 2,000 teachers at its peak. Students came from across Asia, from China, Korea, Japan, Tibet, and beyond, to study Buddhism, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and more. The library was housed in 3 massive buildings, one of which was 9 stories tall. When invaders set fire to the library in the 12th century, legend says the books burned for 3 months. That's how vast the collection was. Nalanda represented something revolutionary. The idea that knowledge should be sought systematically, that students should travel great distances to study with masters, that learning itself was a worthy pursuit regardless of immediate practical application. The university stood for over 700 years, and though it was eventually destroyed, its legacy lives on in universities around the world that still operate on similar principles, gathering scholars, accumulating knowledge, teaching the next generation. Let your thoughts drift now to ancient Polynesia, to the remarkable feat of navigation that populated the Pacific Islands. Between 3000 BCE and 1000 CE, Polynesian voyagers sailed across the vast Pacific Ocean in double-hulled canoes, navigating thousands of miles of open water without compasses, sextants, or maps. They used the stars, the sun, ocean swells, cloud formations, bird flight patterns, and even the taste and temperature of the water to find tiny islands scattered across the world's largest ocean. They could read the waves like books, feeling how swells refracted around distant islands they couldn't yet see. This tradition of navigation, called wayfinding, was passed down through generations, with master navigators training apprentices in an art that required incredible skill, knowledge, and courage. The Polynesians settled Hawaii, Easter Island, New Zealand, and countless other islands, creating a maritime culture that spanned an area larger than any ancient empire. Their voyages represent one of humanity's greatest adventures, proving that ancient peoples were capable of extraordinary feats of exploration and navigation. Now drift with me to ancient Greece once more, to the mathematician Euclid, who lived around 300 BCE in Alexandria. Euclid wrote a work called The Elements, a systematic compilation of geometry that remained a standard mathematics textbook for over 2,000 years, the most influential textbook in history. In The Elements, Euclid started with a few basic axioms, self-evident truths, and from these, using pure logic, built up an entire system of geometry. Proposition by proposition, proof by proof, he showed how complex mathematical truths could be derived from simple starting points. The beauty of Euclid's work lies not just in the results but in the method. The idea that you can start with what is known and use reason alone to discover what is unknown. This axiomatic method became the model for all rigorous thinking. When you study geometry in school, you're likely studying Euclid, learning the same proofs he laid out over 2 millennia ago. His work reminds us that some human achievements are truly timeless, that rigorous thinking transcends culture and era. Let yourself sink even deeper now, traveling to ancient Mesopotamia one final time, to the Epic of Gilgamesh once more, but focusing on a specific story within it, the Great Flood. In the epic, Gilgamesh meets Utnapishtim, a man who survived the Great Flood sent by the gods. Utnapishtim built a boat, saved his family and animals, and when the flood receded, sent out birds to find land. This story, written on clay tablets around 2100 BCE, bears striking similarities to the biblical story of Noah's Ark, which was written much later. The flood narrative appears in various forms across many ancient Middle Eastern cultures. Whether these stories record a real catastrophic flood, perhaps a massive flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates, or represent a universal human fear of overwhelming natural disaster, they show how stories travel and transform across cultures and millennia. The same themes, the same archetypes, appear again and again in different civilizations, suggesting something universal in the human experience and imagination. Now let your mind wander to ancient China once more, to the invention of gunpowder, which occurred during the Tang dynasty around the 9th century CE. Ironically, Chinese alchemists discovered gunpowder while searching for an elixir of immortality. They were mixing various substances, trying to create a potion that would extend life indefinitely, when they created a mixture that exploded. The Chinese initially used gunpowder for fireworks and signals, then later for weapons. The knowledge eventually spread along the Silk Road to the Islamic world and then to Europe, where it would transform warfare and eventually change world history. It's a reminder that discoveries often come from unexpected places, that the search for one thing can lead to something entirely different, and that inventions can have consequences far beyond what their creators imagined. Travel with me now to ancient Rome once more, to consider something simple but revolutionary, the Codex. For most of ancient history, texts were written on scrolls, long rolls of papyrus or parchment. But around the 1st century CE, the Romans began to develop the Codex, a book with individual pages bound together. Early Christians particularly embraced the Codex format for their scriptures. The Codex offered many advantages. You could flip directly to any page rather than unrolling an entire scroll. You could write on both sides of each page, and codices were more compact and portable. The Codex format was so superior that it gradually replaced the scroll throughout the ancient world. Every book you've ever held, every novel, every textbook, is a descendant of this Roman innovation. The Codex didn't just change how texts were stored, it changed how people read, making it easier to reference, compare passages, and navigate complex texts. Now, as you rest at the very threshold of sleep, let yourself drift to ancient Egypt one final time, to the mysterious smile of the Sphinx. The Great Sphinx of Giza, carved around 2500 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, is the oldest known monumental sculpture in Egypt. It has the body of a lion and the head of a human, likely representing the pharaoh himself. For over 4,500 years, the Sphinx has gazed eastward across the desert. For much of its existence, it was buried up to its shoulders in sand, revealed and covered again by the shifting desert over the centuries. The Sphinx's nose is missing. No one knows for certain how it was destroyed, though it was already gone by the 15th century. Between its paws lies a stone tablet placed there by Pharaoh Thutmose IV, recording a dream in which the Sphinx promised him the throne if he would clear away the sand. The Sphinx embodies mystery. Who built it? What did it mean to the ancient Egyptians? What secrets lie beneath it? Some questions have answers, but some remain mysteries, and perhaps that's as it should be. The past should retain some of its enigmas, some of its wonder. And finally, as you drift into the deepest rest, consider one last thought: writing itself. Around 3200 BCE, in Mesopotamia and Egypt, humans began to create permanent marks that represented language. Before writing, all human knowledge existed only in memory, passed from person to person, generation to generation, subject to forgetting and distortion. But with writing, thoughts could be frozen in time. A person could speak to someone they would never meet, who would live centuries after their death. Writing made history possible, not just the events themselves, but the recording and remembering of events. Everything you've heard tonight, every fact, every story, every achievement of these ancient civilizations, survives because someone, somewhere, wrote it down. Someone carved it in stone, pressed it into clay, inked it on papyrus or parchment. Writing is humanity's most important invention, because it allows all other inventions and ideas to be preserved and shared. And now you, resting here in the darkness, have received these stories, these gifts from the ancient world. You are the recipient of thousands of years of human knowledge, wisdom, and dreams. Sleep now, knowing that you are connected to every human who ever wondered, who ever created, who ever tried to leave something behind for those who would come after. Rest peacefully, carried by the accumulated wisdom of ages, cradled by the voices of the ancient world, knowing that the human story continues, that each generation adds its chapter, and that tomorrow, you too will be part of that eternal story.